Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is Here We Go Round the Orrery Bush. Okay. All right, so I'm glad I got my foot in the door on this one, and here we go with it. You know, there's a lot more to go with Joseph von Fraunhofer here, but there was a couple of things that I wanted to mention about the Fraunhofer Society that I let fall by the wayside there. One is that it was founded in 1949, which is very interesting considering how close to the end of World War II that is, and its location, Munich, Germany. And I guess we're going to be exploring Munich a little bit further down the line. So I wanted to point that out. And again, I don't know how deep I'm going to get into like what World War II is and everything. That seems like so far away from me in my research, but I suppose it's going to be possible. But I don't think it's a coincidence that all of this, I don't think it's a coincidence that this scientific society, this technological society, sort of is born out of the heart of Germany in 1949. There's more to that story. But also, I wanted to talk a little bit about the experiences I've been having with all the web pages for these places, right? This is the Fraunhofer Society main page, and then, there was the Equinox, and Hopkins Public Health, the Bloomberg, the Bloomberg School of Public Health, the Royal Society, right? And, I have to say how underwhelmed I am by all my experiences on these websites. It seems like these are billion-dollar corporations, industries, whatever, that their web pages and stuff should be slightly more user-friendly. Of course, I think that, well, that's kind of on purpose. I mean, I doubt there's very much traffic coming to this Fraunhofer site or the Bloomberg site or the Royal Society site, right? They're smoke screens, really, Yeah, and it just, every time I would go to one, and I can't believe this joke, because it's been in several takes, I can't believe it's never made it out there, is that all of these pages, all these companies and corporations, they're just building better web pages with Wix, But I wanted to talk about this one here, because again, Fraunhofer, $3 billion a year industry. And here's their location map for where their campuses are, or their institutes, as they like to call them, where their institutes are. I hear they're New York ones. This is $1 billion corporation, $3 billion a year budget. The highest tech, highest scientific stuff going on. Right? And now I didn't go through all of them in the other episode, but they had offices in New York. And the pins for their offices in New York are actually in the Atlantic Ocean, and there are ones in Maryland and Virginia too. I mean, really? You can't create a map that puts your pins where your actual institutes are? That just cracks me up. And so that's one that got left by the wayside yesterday. But before we can move on again with our story of the House of New Light and all of this technology and through spectroscopy that they're about to bring us, I wanted to talk more about some of Fraunhofer's contemporaries, right? Because he didn't do this stuff in a vacuum. And he was influenced by people. And, as the story's going, like, if this is all just fake to cover up for all this, wonder, all this marvelous technology that we have today that they use to manipulate us in every way imaginable, right? And so they lay the groundwork for it with these guys, and we talked about them, and Newton, of course, and Wollaston, who was president of the Royal Society. The creation of the Royal Society falls in this window here, as, we read their charter, a little bit of it anyway. Right? And the powers that it grants, unbelievable powers that charter grants, right? And, at this point, again, to make the story believable to the future that they want to create, they have to start separating the science from the religion, because in the early days, and even Copernicus was the son of a priest, and he was a Jesuit, and so on and so forth, it all stems from religion and religious institutions and things like that. And we're going to get even a bit closer than that very soon. And So they need to start breaking the science out of the religion, because that's what they want to do with the science, is to create the illusion of an alternative. Religion, government, and technology. All right, and Wollaston's stories is kind of cool because he was one of 17. Right? His father was a priest astronomer. Right, and again, it's right at this time, and I'm going to talk about coming up very soon, like some of the coincidences in this time period here, this late 18th century, because really most of these guys would have been born in the late 18th century, mid to late 18th century, and their work really coming to the forefront in the early 19th century. All right, and so Wollaston here, all right, and so they kind of jump here. They talk about the importance of they jump from Wollaston here, and they jump to Fraunhofer, and again, the story gets more inconsistent, of course, as we go. I mean, of course, and as I talked about, Wiki is just the front gate. Right? They're the first gatekeeper. But I wanted to talk about some of his contemporaries a little bit. And then the next episode will be, and we'll get back into Fraunhofer. The story just gets crazy for me, right? But, among his contemporaries, and, Fraunhofer, of course, was influenced by a lot of these guys, right? Again, because he wasn't doing this stuff in a vacuum or on an island, right? So this theory of light interference was developed by one Thomas Young. And so let's look at him real quick. And of course, he was a fellow of the Royal Society, polymath. You just have to look at the things that this guy had his hands in. And I want to point out, too, I didn't get into it in the episode, but Athanasius Kircher, that Jesuit founder of the scientific revolution, was deeply involved in the translation of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. But Young's work was as influential or helpful in deciphering the Rosetta Stone as it came to be deciphered. He was touted as the last man who knew everything, right? And he's credited with establishing the wave theory of light, right? And his work was subsequently reported by Augustin Jean Fresnel. And we're going to talk about him in a minute as well. Just amazing. The last man who knew everything, 1773 to 1829. And not that he didn't live to be that old either, right? 55. Fresnel here, and he was a French engineer and physicist whose research in optics led to the almost unanimous acceptance of the wave theory of light. Almost unanimous. I love the language, because that suggests that there is consensus out there, however a minority, that there's more to light than just the wave theory, and that light can function in different ways, perhaps. And that also his almost unanimous wave theory excludes Newton's corpuscular theory. But he's best known for his lens making, and this is something that he has in common with Fraunhofer, right? And that he makes condenser lenses for, and I look at this, overhead projectors. We all know what they are. We all saw them in school. They don't have them like this anymore. They're all smartboard computers and stuff. But this is what I worked with, elementary school through high school and everything, right? Overhead projectors. Let's look at his dates, 1788 to 1827. And this goes with the magic lantern that Bamforth was making, educational slideshows for, What were they doing with this type of technology in 1810? Curious, very curious. And that they say that Fresnel here, by expressing Huygens, and I'm not going to look at him, principle of secondary waves, and Young's principle of interference in quantitative terms, of course, and supposing that simple colors consist of sinusoidal waves, Fresnel gave the first satisfactory explanation of diffraction by straight edges. And so, first satisfactory, supposing that simple color, like I'm supposing that this whole historical narrative is BS. Since when is satisfactory good enough for science? Since when is satisfactory good enough? And I love how he looks. He kind of looks like Edward Scissorhands to me. But again, responsible for so many achievements optically and with lenses. And it's through these lenses that the science of spectroscopy is really pushed forward. Because I think, by this point, they've realized the potential for the technology, and whether or not these technologies and these instruments are are reverse engineered from recovered technology, or it is a deliberate rollout of technology that they know is ready to go. But they're getting ready to start unleashing this scientific technology on the world within the next 30 years of this. I just wanted to touch on this, that he had a lifelong battle with tuberculosis, and he died at the age of 39. And so he's sick this whole time that he is, developing and advancing and doing all of this stuff with optics and lenses and wave light theory and stuff. Just unbelievable, his story. And I realized that I cut away from Jung too fast because I wanted to touch on another person. And so now in dealing with Herschel, we might as well just talk about the Herschel family, okay? And that's a point I want to make, and that will be illustrated going forward, is how so many of these important, influential scientists in the field of spectroscopy are related, especially on the astronomy side of it. I haven't gotten into like the molecular side of the micro side of it. I haven't gotten into it all, but I'm sure we find the same type of nepotism there as well. But see, Frederick here, he's a Knight of the Guelphic Order. He's a fellow of the Royal Society. His sister is also an astronomer. All right, she discovers several comets, and this is where, like I said, they start bringing in like the amateur astronomer. And there's Herschel's sister. God, they didn't hire a very good portrait artist for her. Look, at 78 years old, she wins the gold medal for the Royal Astronomical Society. And again, this is something that's also been illustrated through, at least in the science world, women are not thought of as intellectual inferiors at all. And I'm going to demonstrate that going forward too. I mean, that may get buried come the turn of the 18th or the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. But intellectually speaking, in the scientific community, women were not thought of as inferiors, at least from what I'm getting. Right? She was the first woman to receive a salary as a scientist. Amazing, right? And so her brother, master astronomer, right? And also his son is David. I think he's the royal astronomer for the House of Hanover. Right? He constructed his first large telescope in 1774. So now allegedly, and this is one thing I wanted to talk about too, is the time frame that a lot of these scientific breakthroughs with the instruments is happening is right around the time of the American and French Revolutions. And I don't think that's a coincidence either. Right? And we're going to talk more about that going forward. All right, so just interesting, his time frame, who he's associated with, his sister and his son. And we're going to talk about his son in a minute because the name Herschel came up in the Psyop City Part 1 episode. And Scott Marrow here, he left me this great comment. Thank you so much for this comment, Scott. He mentions that Herschel was one who admitted they chose to go with the globe for aesthetic reasons. And he says he counted up to 16 Rahu-type disks. Now, if you're not familiar with what Rahu is invisible celestial object in our close atmosphere that is responsible for the eclipses, and they're not shadows of the earth and the moon and so forth, right? And so I thought that was an amazing comment, and I wanted to sort of can I get corroboration on that? Right? And so I went looking, and there's the book on zetetic astronomy, which if people out there are into flat earth and flat earth research, they may be familiar with that. I know that when I was first getting into flat earth, there were some channels that I was interested in that were using that as their source material, and in it, I've gone and I've read some of these chapters, and it's just too much to go through and sort of find these parts. But here Herschel admits that invisible moons exist in the firmament, and so now John Herschel would be, and he comes up but here John Herschel, son of William Herschel, also a Knight of the Guelphic Order, fellow of the Royal Society, keeping everything in the family, right? Years active, those mid 1800 years. And so he's still talking about the firmament, perhaps even as late as 1871. That's the thing about not getting that deep into Herschel's research and published works. I mean, he could have published retractions about the firmament and everything, who knows, but certainly as late as the mid-1800s still talking about the firmament, right? What's BT? A baronet. Well, it's a hereditary title, which is interesting. It's got a red right hand. Oh my God. All right. So again, I can't stay too long on these people. I don't want these episodes to go on forever. All right, so very interesting. And I will bring up William H. F. Talbot here real quick. He's a fellow of both the Royal Society, the Scottish Royal Society, and the Royal Astronomical Society. Primarily, his work would have been from the 1820s through a nice 50-year span there for him. But he was mainly known for his work in photography. I'm sure that's going to come up very soon. But again, polymath, good at so much: calculus, optics, chemistry, electricity, etymology, the study of words, ancient history, of course, because you have to tie all that in. Really interesting stuff. But the last guy I want to talk about is somebody they don't even mention here. I have to get to him through Fraunhofer's page. When I discovered that, when they talk about how he was given a knighthood and a personal nobility, he was knighted, Ritter von. Here we go. That he developed the diffraction grating after James Gregory discovered principles of diffraction grating. And now James Gregory, fellow of the Royal Society, probably an original founding fellow of the Royal Society. And he looks like he belongs to Spinal Tap too. Nigel Tuffin, a little bit. All right, and then the person I really want to talk about here, and where the title of this episode kind of comes from, is David Rittenhouse. And when I saw that name, right, it mentions here that he made the first man-made diffraction grating, implying that there were diffraction gratings not made by man. Right, in 1785, David Rittenhouse. And when I saw Ritten, I was like, that means knight, right? Just because he was just knighted, Ritter, knight, so he's knight of the household. Whose house is he knight of, right? And so he was an American astronomer, inventor, clockmaker, mathematician, surveyor, scientific instrument craftsman, your garden variety polymath. And he was a member of the American Philosophical Society and first director of the United States Mint. Look at this picture of him, with this archaic-looking telescope. And he's pointing at something on there. I wonder what he's pointing at. It's probably Venus, if I'm not mistaken. Because he was renowned for his work on the study of the Venus transit. All right, but his name actually comes from his town. So he's one of those who really didn't have a proper surname. Or his family didn't, because Rittenhouse Town is in Philadelphia. All right, and it refers to the Rittenhouse Historic District, which encompasses the remains of the early industrial community, which was the site of the first paper mill in British North America. And now think about that for a second. And on a couple different ways, right? Because the mill was built in 1690. And now the British have been coming over and settling North America in some way, shape, or form since on record in the historical narrative since the late 1500s. Virginia's the 1590s, I think, right? And so for 100 years, and then the bigger settlements come in, the Plymouths and the Marylands, right? and the Pennsylvanian, right? They all come in like right around the 1620s. So for like 60, 70 years, there's no paper mill in America. And one of the things that's interesting about that is, I do have, and I'm sure I mentioned it somewhere probably a year ago already, that I have a textbook on the exploration of the Chesapeake Bay. And in it, it talks about how in the first letters that John Smith wrote back, he talks about all the trees and what a great boon that's going to be for the British lumber industry, because apparently Britain had wiped out all its trees. They needed too many Thneeds, I guess. They didn't listen to the Lorax in Britain. So they needed trees desperately. So it's curious that it took them so long to get a paper mill going. Yeah, that seems curious to me. And that this this David Rittenhouse, but anyway, that's where he gets his name, and he becomes the first the first director of the United States Mint. There's no coincidence in that. Right? Unbelievable. Right? His uncle dies and he inherits these carpentry tools. And at a very young age, David, knight of the house. Right? He creates a working scale it was his grandfather, a scale model of his grandfather's paper mill. Right? Unbelievable. And by 13, he had mastered Newton's laws of motion and gravity, is gravity law? I thought it was still just a theory. I don't know. Let's take a look. Gravitation, or the law of gravity. All right, they call it a law. Gravity is most accurately described by the general theory of relativity. So how could a law come from a theory? Interesting. All right. Again, I just pay so little attention to the actual hardcore science of it because that's not me, and I know that they can back up their science with their equations and their papers and things like that, So again, I'm more about, who's this guy associated with? Where did he learn it? Why should I trust what he's telling me on this paper? But anyway, so he Rittenhouse. By a late teenager, he starts making clocks and with wooden gears, right, and scientific instruments. By 19. He starts a scientific instrument workshop, right? Valley Forge. His skill with instruments, particularly clocks, led him to construct 2 orreries, scale models of the solar system. First for the College of New Jersey, now Princeton, Ivy League, right? And also the University of Pennsylvania. Right? And so, what are orreries? And orreries are mechanical models of the solar system, right? Usually according to the heliocentric model. They are, look, this is how our mathematics work. This is how the theories that we've been cooking up for the last 250 years look, Imagine this, all right? Oh, okay, now I kind of see it now, right? Yeah, that kind of works. And you develop this enough and you introduce it early enough and people are going to believe that's what it is, right? I like this. So it says it may represent relative sizes, but accurate scaling is often not practical due to the actual large ratio differences. A subdued approximation may be used instead. They allow you to cheat. All right, the Greeks, of course, because they were the Greeks, they had planetaria. Right, the Greeks had these. They had theaters built for educational and entertaining shows. Entertaining education. All right, that's the way it is. You got to entertain to educate, or they won't learn the things you want them to learn. Right, training for celestial navigation. How did they do this in ancient times? All right, here we go. The ancient Greek polymath Archimedes. I have to write that name down. Is attributed with creating a primitive planetarium device that could predict the movements of the sun and the moon and the planets. All right, and they say that the discovery of the Antikythera mechanism proved that such devices already existed in antiquity. And so they're saying that the Antikythera device is an orrery. All right, that's what they're telling us. But since they don't have any others other than that corroded one to work off of, we just have to trust them. Right? But they say these devices likely existed after Archimedes' time, right? Right? The Campanus of Novara described a planetary equatorium in the 13th century and included instructions on how to build one. That's interesting. Okay, so Campanus of Novara is a person, right? And this Theoretica Planetarium is allegedly a treatise he wrote in the 13th century. And so I went digging, and they have it here at the archive.org. Theoretica Planetarium. Right? And now this is a publication from 1778. Right? But they tell us that it was written in the 1300s, or the 13th century, rather. Right? And so this is a translation with illustrations. Now, it says, this book included instructions on how to build one of these devices. All right, in the 1200s. But now we have this and again, I'm not going to go up digging. I'm going to talk more about this type of stuff down the line. And I just discovered this morning, making this episode way longer than it should. But here, I guess, would be these instructions. And now, I just want to point out the date of this, right? They say 1200s written, right? And this book, the copy that they have here, 1700s. Very interesting, especially with some of the stuff I'm going to discuss in the next couple episodes. So let's get back to the Orrery so I can get back to Rittenhouse and wrap this one up. But the Greeks apparently had planetaria, right? Right? And these orreries, they get its name from the Earl of Orrery. Look, was the Earl of Orrery a member of the Fellow Society? What is this? He was on the Privy Council, right? Part of the King's Royal Court. He's of the Order of the Thistle. Nice. The most ancient and most noble Order of the Thistle. But anyway, so it's, these instruments, these are the things that they put in the universities to start backing up the papers that they've been writing and the mathematics that they've been working out, at least in the historical record. They want to tell us, they want to paint a linear picture with this stuff. All right, and so I don't know if this is the orrery that Rittenhouse made, but, here they go, the Antikythera mechanism. Again, it's all secondhand information. What is this one? This is a reconstruction of. So they're using the blueprints, quote unquote, to build these things. But, originally built in 1348, 1364, do they have an original one? Here's one they say built in the 1500s, an astronomical clock. And so that's what they want to tie orreries into time. Right? And that's also I hadn't really thought of that with the orrery and the clockworks, and especially that, I haven't done any research into the history of clocks, but the idea of timekeeping and how our controllers use time. Not a coincidence, I don't think, that all of this stuff is happening at this era, during this late 18th century. Right? And Rittenhouse here, he served on the American Astronomical Society. He knew Ben Franklin. The American Philosophical Society was founded by Ben Franklin, right? And he actually, he takes over as librarian and secretary after Ben Franklin dies. Another one of his interests was the Royal Society of London, of which he was also a member. Right after the American Revolution, he had no problem, becoming a member of a fellow of the Royal Society. It's all interconnected. They're all serving the same masters. They're all scheming. They all have their schemes. They all have their schemes to serve science and to create that third part of their trinity of control. All right, wrapping this one up. I had a lot of fun with it, more fun than I've been having with this information the last week or so anyway. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and until the next one, cheers, guys.